My stepmother makes me work a lot. I, a little girl, go to the police station and greet everyone. Lucy, a 5-year-old girl, stood by the small window of the old house, her large tear-filled eyes staring out at the rain. At her age, she should have been running and playing, but Lucy only experienced silence, loneliness, and an aching longing for her mother. The small town she lived in felt far too vast and cold for a child with no one to depend on. Lucy, come down here immediately. Her stepmother, Ellen, called out, her icy voice echoing from downstairs. Yes, I'm coming, Lucy answered softly, her weak voice trembling as if afraid of making Ellen even angrier. She quietly hurried down the stairs, her tiny feet moving as quickly as possible to avoid irritating Ellen. Her stepmother stood in the kitchen, one hand holding a dish towel and the other resting on her hip. The expensive dress and elaborately curled brown hair Ellen wore made her look entirely out of place compared to Lucy's simplicity. What were you doing up there, daydreaming again? Go wash the dishes, hurry up, Ellen barked. Lucy lowered her head and walked toward the sink filled with dirty dishes. Her small hands trembled from the cold water, but she didn't dare complain. When Charles, Lucy's father, had brought Ellen into their home after remarrying, she had initially seemed so sweet. Lucy had thought she found a new mother to love, but everything changed just weeks after Charles left for a long business trip. Ellen transformed into an entirely different person. Be careful with that plate. If you break it, you'll regret it, Ellen shouted from the living room. Lucy took a deep breath and bit her lip to keep her tears from falling. She continued her work silently, like a shadow. After dinner, as usual, Ellen sat in the living room watching TV, while Lucy had to clean everything up. Once everything was spotless, she timidly stood beside Ellen, her hands tightly clasped together. Stepmother, I finished cleaning. May I go to my room now? Ellen didn't bother to look at her and waved her hand dismissively. Go, but make sure to get up early tomorrow to mop the floor. I don't want to see a speck of dust. Understand? Yes, I understand, Lucy whispered. She climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavy, as if carrying the weight of her sorrowful heart. Her room was small, with only a hard bed and a thin blanket. The nights in the town were often very cold, but Lucy didn't dare ask for an extra blanket for fear of angering Ellen. Before going to bed, Lucy quietly took a picture of her birth mother from under her pillow. In the photo, her mother smiled warmly, her eyes bright like sunshine. Mum, I miss you so much, Lucy whispered. The next morning, before the sun had risen, Lucy was startled awake by Ellen's loud knocking on the door. Lucy, get up now. Today you need to clean the entire kitchen. Don't make me repeat myself. Lucy quickly got out of bed and dressed. Her stomach growled with hunger, but she didn't dare mention it. Breakfast for Lucy was just a hard slice of bread and a glass of water. While Lucy mopped the floor, she overheard Ellen talking to their neighbor, Mrs. Martha. That girl is such a nuisance, Ellen said disdainfully. But what can I do? Charles insisted I take care of her. At least she's useful for doing housework. Mrs. Martha looked sympathetic, her gaze briefly resting on Lucy as she cleaned. But you should be gentler with her. After all, she's just a child, Mrs. Martha insisted. Ellen laughed loudly. Gentle with me. Everyone has to work. If you don't work, you don't eat. It's as simple as that. Lucy kept her head down, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't dare let Ellen see as she continued cleaning in silence. In the afternoon, While Ellen left the house to meet her friends, Lucy stayed behind alone, but it didn't bring her any peace. She needed to rush to finish the list of chores Ellen had left before returning. While washing clothes in the backyard, Lucy heard the doorbell ring. She quickly dried her hands and ran to open the door. Standing there was a boy about her age, with messy black hair and a dirty face but bright, sparkling eyes. "Hi, I'm Paul from next door," he said with a radiant smile. "I've noticed you're always inside and never come out to play. Do you want to play with me?" Lucy froze, unsure how to respond. This was the first time anyone had invited her to play. I can't. My stepmother doesn't let me go outside," Lucy whispered, her eyes filled with sadness. Paul frowned. "Really? But you're a kid. Kids are supposed to play. How about I come in and play with you?" Lucy shook her head, frightened. "No, you can't. If my stepmother finds out, she'll be very angry." Paul sighed, but gave her an encouraging smile. "Okay. But if you ever get to come outside, let me know. I live just over there." Lucy nodded, watching him run off. A small spark of hope flickered in her heart, but was quickly extinguished when she heard Ellen's car pull up in front of the house. Lucy carefully folded the clean clothes she had just washed, her small hands trembling from the cold water soaking her skin. Paul's words echoed in her mind. Kids are supposed to play, but for Lucy, playing outside felt like a distant dream. Her days revolved around chores and scolding. The sound of Ellen's high heels clicking behind her made Lucy flinch, and she turned around to see Ellen standing with her arms crossed, sharp eyes fixed on the pile of clothes. "What's taking so long? Are you daydreaming again? I'm sorry." "I'll finish right away." Lucy lowered her head, picking up the last few items and folding them quickly. Ellen stepped closer, grabbed a shirt from Lucy's hands, and snapped, "Look at this." "How? Are you folding this? Clearly you're not paying attention. Do you want to be punished?" Lucy shook her head, her eyes full of fear. No, I'll do it again. Don't bother. You can't do anything right anyway. Go clean the kitchen. Now." Ellen threw the shirt onto the floor and walked away. Lucy bent down to pick up the shirt, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. She didn't dare wipe them away, fearing Ellen might see. Entering the kitchen, she began cleaning up the mess. Ellen had made breadcrumbs littered the dining table, a greasy pan sat on the stove, and a broken plate lay scattered on the floor. "Why do I have to do all of this?" Lucy wondered, but quickly berated herself for thinking such things. When Ellen left the house again, Lucy decided to sneak out into the backyard. It was the only place where she felt safe, far from Ellen's scrutinizing eyes. In a corner of the yard, Lucy found an old box her birth mother had once used to keep mementos. Opening it, she discovered a handkerchief embroidered with her name and a small diary. She sat down and flipped through the diaries. Pages, her mother's gentle handwriting, brought tears to Lucy's eyes. "My dearest Lucy, you are the light of my life. I always hope you grow up surrounded by happiness and love." Reading this, Lucy felt her heart tighten painfully. "Mum, do you know I'm living in a nightmare?" she thought, clutching the handkerchief tightly. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine startled her. Lucy hurriedly hid the box back in its place and ran inside the house. Ellen had returned carrying bags full of goods. "Lucy, get out here now," she yelled from the front door. Double quotes, "Yes, I'm coming," Lucy replied, rushing out to take the heavy bags from her stepmother. "Don't drop anything, or you'll regret it," Ellen said, her voice filled with menace. Lucy nodded and carefully carried each bag into the kitchen. As she placed the items neatly on the shelves, Ellen sat down on a chair, turned on loud music, and began chatting on the phone with her friends. I honestly don't know why Charles thought I should be responsible for raising that girl, Ellen said sarcastically. She's just a burden to me. But at least she's useful for housework. Lucy heard every word clearly, and her heart ached. Am I just a burden? That evening, Lucy sat alone in her room, her stomach growling. From hunger, her dinner had been just a piece of dry bread and a little water. Ellen often indulged in delicious meals, but Lucy was only allowed to eat leftovers. In the darkness, Lucy took out the picture of her birth mother and gazed at it. Mum, if you were still alive, everything would be different, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A sudden, harsh knock on the door startled Lucy. Are you asleep yet? Tomorrow you need to wake up early and clean the house. Don't be lazy, Ellen called out irritably. I understand, Lucy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Ellen walked away, leaving behind a heavy silence. Lucy lay down, trying to fall asleep, but memories of her mother flooded her mind. She missed her mother's hugs, her kisses, and the gentle lullabies she used to sing. The next morning, Lucy was startled awake by Ellen's shouting. Lucy, what are you doing still? In bed, you lazy girl, Ellen yelled, yanking the blanket off. I'm sorry, I'm getting up, Lucy stammered, scrambling to her feet. Get to the kitchen immediately. I won't say it again. Lucy quickly washed her face and ran to the kitchen. Today, Ellen tasked her with cleaning all the kitchen cabinets. The tall cabinets forced Lucy to stand on tiptoe to reach them, but she didn't dare complain. As she worked, Lucy felt lightheaded from hunger. She tried to finish her task, but her small hands couldn't hold the large frying pan. It fell to the floor with a loud clatter. Ellen appeared instantly, her eyes blazing with anger. What did you do now? Why do you always cause trouble? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, Lucy said, her voice trembling. Didn't mean to. I'm so sick of your clumsiness. Go to your room now. I don't want to see you, Ellen shouted, pushing Lucy out of the kitchen. Lucy stumbled up the stairs, tears streaming down her face. A deep sense of helplessness and despair overwhelmed her. Lucy curled up on her hard bed, quietly wiping her tears with her sleeve. Ellen's harsh words echoed in her mind, cutting deep into her fragile heart. Her room was so cold that her breath was visible in the air, but she didn't dare ask for another blanket. The last time she had asked, Ellen had scoffed, If you're cold, work harder, that'll warm you up. The hunger kept Lucy from sleeping. The piece of dry bread she had eaten that morning wasn't enough to sustain her through a long day. Of hard work, she thought of the keepsake box in the garden where she had once found small comfort, but even that couldn't ease the pain in her heart. The next morning, Ellen banged on Lucy's door. Get up, you lazy girl. How can you sleep? In a house this dirty, Lucy jumped out of bed and quickly dressed, without even brushing her teeth. She began scrubbing the floors. Ellen stood watching from a distance, her eyes like a hawk ready to catch any mistake. Scrub harder, look at those stains. Do you expect me to clean them myself? Ellen shouted. I'm sorry, I'll redo it. Lucy mumbled, trying to hide, her red hands raw from scrubbing for so long. As Lucy cleaned the last step of the staircase, the doorbell rang. Ellen hurried to answer it and welcomed her friend, Mrs. Rose. Rose, come in, have a seat. I just finished cleaning the house. It's spotless now, Ellen said proudly. Lucy kept her head down and continued her work. but couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "Where's Lucy?" Mrs. Rose asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "She's over there," Ellen said, pointing to Lucy. "I make her work to keep her from being idle. Kids need discipline or they'll grow up spoiled." Mrs. Rose frowned, "But she's still so young. Aren't you worried about overworking her?" Ellen laughed loudly. "Kids these days are too soft. I used to do twice as much work at her age and turned out just fine." Lucy bit her lip, holding back her tears. She felt like a shadow, unnoticed and unprotected. That afternoon, Ellen instructed Lucy to take a clean towel to the backyard to hang the laundry. While working, Lucy glanced over the fence where Paul, the boy next door, was playing with a small dog. Paul waved at Lucy, but she shook her head, her eyes filled with fear. Ellen appeared instantly, her face hardening when she saw Lucy pause. "What are you doing? Daydreaming again? Don't you know hanging laundry isn't just about throwing it on the line? It needs to look neat and tidy." "I'm sorry. I'll fix it right away," Lucy stammered, trying to straighten the towel. "Don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. Understand?" Ellen said threateningly. Lucy bowed her head, feeling her chest tighten. Ellen's words weren't just scolding, they felt like humiliation. That evening, after cleaning up Ellen's dinner, Lucy secretly took a small piece of bread left on the table. Before she could take a bite, Ellen suddenly returned. "What do you think you're doing? Who gave you permission to eat?" Ellen yelled, snatching the bread from Lucy's hand. "I'm so hungry," Lucy whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "Hungry? Do you think this is a hotel? If you want to eat, you better work for it. From now on, you'll eat only when I say." "So, understood," Ellen shouted, shoving Lucy out of the kitchen. Lucy stumbled into her room, her stomach growling and head spinning. She lay down on her bed, clutching the thin blanket, feeling as though the entire world had turned against her. The next day, when Charles called home from his business trip, Lucy's heart leaped with hope. She rushed to the living room, trying to get closer to the phone. "Dad," Lucy started to say, but before she could continue, Ellen snatched the phone away. "Lucy, go to the kitchen." "I'll talk to your father," Ellen ordered. "Yes," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible as she quietly left the room. From the kitchen, she could hear Ellen talking to Charles. "Lucy is very obedient. Don't worry, she's still young and a bit clumsy, but I'm teaching her. Everything's fine here." Lucy felt her heart shatter. She wanted to scream, to tell her father the truth, but she knew she couldn't. Ellen always threatened her, saying things would only get worse if Lucy said anything out of line. When the call ended, Ellen turned to Lucy. "Your father said you need to behave and listen to me, so it's best if you don't do anything to upset me." Lucy bowed her head, hiding her tears. A deep sense of despair swelled within her, leaving her feeling trapped with no way out. Lucy was jolted awake by Ellen's loud banging on the door. "Lucy, get up right now. I don't want to call you twice." Ellen's sharp voice rang out, void of any patience. Lucy opened her eyes. The dim light from the window did little to warm her cold, dreary room. She quickly got up, put on her old, worn clothes, and hurried out of her room. Ellen stood at the bottom of the stairs holding a long list of tasks. "I'll be out all day today, and I want this house spotless, like a mirror when I return." "Here's the list," Ellen said, handing Lucy the paper and giving her a disdainful look. "If you don't finish everything, don't expect to eat dinner." Lucy took the paper silently. The first item read, Clean all glass cabinets and decorations in the living room. Next were tasks like washing rugs, scrubbing the bathroom, and a long list of other chores. Just reading the list made her dizzy. Ellen put on her fur coat, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door. Before leaving, she turned back and emphasized, "Make sure everything is done. If not, don't blame me for being strict." The door slammed shut, leaving Lucy alone in the large but cold house. She held the list and looked at the messy room in front of her. The glass decorations sparkled on the high shelves, well out of her reach. She dragged a chair over, climbed up, and carefully wiped each item clean. Suddenly, the door opened. It was Paul, the boy from next door. He had seen Lucy through the window and decided to stop by for a chat. "Lucy, what are you doing? Why don't you come out and play?" Paul asked, leaning on the doorframe. "Paul, you need to leave. If my stepmother sees you, she'll be furious," Lucy said quickly, her voice filled with panic. "But you've been working non-stop. Why don't you tell your dad?" Paul insisted stubbornly. Lucy stayed silent, her head bowed. She couldn't answer that question. Paul stepped inside, looking around the house. "Do you need help with anything?" he offered. Lucy shook her head. "No, you can't. If my stepmother finds out you were here, she'll be angry and punish me. Please, you have to go." Paul sighed, feeling helpless as he looked at his friend. "If you ever need anything, just knock on my door, okay?" Lucy nodded. "Thank you, Paul." The boy left, leaving Lucy alone to continue her chores. By the afternoon, Lucy was scrubbing the bathroom when dizziness began to set in. The combination of non-stop work and a breakfast consisting of just a piece of bread had left her body exhausted. She paused, leaning against the sink to keep herself from falling, but she didn't dare rest for long. If Ellen came back and found anything undone, Lucy knew the consequences would be unbearable. She pushed herself to keep going, her small hands scrubbing every dirty corner of the white-tiled walls. When she finished, Lucy staggered down to the kitchen to mop the floor. The doorbell rang. Lucy went to answer it, thinking Ellen had returned, but it wasn't her. Standing there was Mrs. Rose, Ellen's close friend. "Hello, ma'am," Lucy said softly. Mrs. Rose looked at the thin, tired girl, her eyes scanning Lucy's frail frame and weary face. "Where's Ellen? Isn't she home?" "My stepmother is out, ma'am," Lucy replied. Mrs. Rose frowned. "What have you been doing to look so exhausted? Have you been cleaning all day?" Lucy didn't know how to respond and simply bowed her head. Mrs. Rose sighed, her expression full of sympathy. "All right, when Ellen gets back, tell her to call me," Rose said before leaving. Lucy closed the door, her heart feeling heavier. She couldn't tell anyone about what she was going through. When Ellen returned that evening, she immediately inspected the work Lucy had done throughout the day. "This cabinet isn't clean. What have you been doing all day that you can't even do something as simple as this?" Ellen yelled angrily. Lucy bowed her head, trying to explain. "I cleaned it, but maybe I missed a spot. Missed a spot. Then clean it again right now." Ellen slammed her hand on the table, making Lucy jump. Trembling, Lucy picked up the cloth and began cleaning the glass cabinet again, even though her small hands had already wiped it countless times that day. When everything was finally done, Lucy went back to her room. Her dinner was nothing more than a cold piece of bread, but she didn't dare ask for anything else. Before going to bed, Lucy took out her mother's photo again, whispering, "Mum, I miss you so much. I don't know what to do anymore." Tears streamed down her face, soaking into her worn-out shirt. Lucy curled up under her thin blanket, trying to find some warmth in the darkness. An idea came to her. Maybe she needed to do something to escape this situation, but how? Where could she go? Who would help her? The unanswered questions kept Lucy awake all night, but a faint glimmer of hope began to flicker in her heart. Early the next morning, as Lucy was drifting in and out of restless sleep, Ellen burst into her room, startling her awake. "Lucy, get up right now. You didn't finish yesterday's tasks, and you think you can just lie around," Ellen yelled, her eyes blazing with anger. Lucy scrambled out of bed, not even brushing her hair, and rushed downstairs. Breakfast, as always, was just a piece of dry bread and a glass of cold water. There was no care or affection from her stepmother, only a never-ending list of chores. Today's list was even longer than usual. She had to wash blankets, scrub the floors, clean the backyard, and reorganize the storage room. Holding the list, Lucy felt as though her small shoulders could no longer bear the weight. While she was washing blankets in the yard, Paul appeared at the fence. "Lucy, are you okay? You look so tired," Paul said, concern etched on his face. Lucy lifted her head and wiped the sweat from her forehead. "I'm fine," she replied, but her weak voice made the statement unconvincing. Paul frowned. "I don't think you're fine. My mum said yesterday that you look much thinner. I think you should talk to your dad." Lucy shook her head. "I can't. My stepmother will get angry if she finds out. But if you keep enduring this, you're going to collapse," Paul said, his eyes full of concern. Lucy looked at Paul, feeling a small warmth from his concern, but she knew no one could help her. Ellen was too harsh, and Charles always trusted her stepmother. "You should go. If my stepmother finds out, she'll punish me," Lucy said softly, before continuing with her laundry. Paul sighed, still watching his friend with worry, before quietly heading back home. That afternoon, after finishing washing the blankets and cleaning the backyard, Lucy had to move on to the storage room. It was where Ellen always assigned her the heaviest tasks. Large, dusty boxes covered in cobwebs were scattered everywhere. Towering over Lucy's small frame, she tried to move each box, but her tiny hands weren't strong enough. After struggling for a while, Lucy collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. She looked at the list of unfinished tasks, feeling as though she was drowning in despair. The doorbell startled her. She quickly stood up and ran to open the door. Standing there was Mrs. Rose, Ellen's close friend. "Is Ellen not home?" Rose asked, her gaze lingering on Lucy's tired face. "No. My stepmother is out," Lucy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Rose looked at her for a long moment, her expression as though she wanted to say something, but then just sighed. "When she gets back, tell her to call me, okay?" "Yes, I will," Lucy said, bowing her head before closing the door. Rose walked away, but the image of the frail, weary little girl stayed with her. That evening, when Ellen returned, she immediately began inspecting Lucy's work. "The storage room isn't done. What have you been doing all day that you can't even finish a simple task?" Ellen yelled, her face red with anger. "I'm sorry, I'll finish it right away," Lucy murmured, her eyes full of fear. "Don't apologize. Just get out of my sight. Go to your room. I don't want to see you anymore," Ellen screamed, pointing toward the stairs. Lucy quietly climbed up to her room, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what to do to escape this situation. Every day felt like a piling of pain and injustice. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. She lay curled up on her hard bed, thinking about the happy days when her birth mother was alive. But those beautiful memories only deepened her sadness. Turning toward her mother's photo, Lucy's tears continued to flow. "Mum, I can't take it anymore. I want to leave this place." The thought burned like a small flame in her heart. Lucy began considering escaping, but where could she go? Who would help her? All night, she tossed and turned with these questions. She was afraid that if she did nothing, her life would only get worse. But if she ran away and got caught, Ellen would surely make her pay. The next morning, Lucy woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest, but the resolve to escape was stronger than ever. While working in the kitchen, she discreetly observed the front door. Whenever Ellen left the house, Lucy would glance outside, trying to memorize the path to the police station she had once passed with her father. "Lucy, focus on your work." Ellen snapped from the living room, startling her. "Yes, I'm doing it," Lucy replied, bowing her head and continuing her chores. Inside her, a determination had ignited. Lucy knew that if she didn't escape, she would never have the chance to live a happy life. That night, Lucy lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. She couldn't sleep, her heart filled with a powerful resolve. "I have to leave this place." For months, Lucy had endured Ellen's mistreatment, but now her body was too weak and her spirit was nearly broken. If she continued living like this, she wouldn't survive much longer. When the clock struck midnight, Lucy quietly sat up. She listened carefully to Ellen's steady breathing from the next room. Once she was sure Ellen was asleep, Lucy gently removed her thin blanket and got out of bed. She opened a drawer and took out her mother's photo, carefully tucking it into her pocket. "I'll find a safe place, Mum, I promise you." Lucy stepped lightly across the floor, trying not to make any noise. She didn't take anything with her except the photo and a small flicker of hope. Reaching the front door, she slowly turned. The handle, the faint click made her heart race, but Ellen didn't stir. Lucy opened the door and stepped outside, quietly closing it behind her. The cold night air enveloped her. She stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath to gather her courage, then began to run. The dark street was lit only by faint streetlights, and the cold wind bit at her small hands, making them numb. But Lucy didn't stop. Her small feet pounded against the damp ground, each step carrying her fear and determination. Every time she heard a noise, Lucy turned around, terrified that Ellen might be chasing her. But there was only darkness and empty streets around her. As she ran past the small park in the town center, Lucy suddenly heard a dog barking. She panicked and pressed herself into a shadowy corner beside a tree, her heart pounding in her chest, afraid someone might find her. It was just a stray dog running by. Lucy sighed in relief, but the fear in her heart didn't fade. She continued, running, heading toward the police station she had seen with her father. Time passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour. Lucy's legs began to ache, but she didn't dare stop. When she finally saw the lights of a small building in the distance, her heart leaped. The police station. I finally made it. Lucy ran the last stretch and stopped in front of the large door. She looked up at the lit building, feeling as though it was the only place that could save her. Taking a deep breath, Lucy pushed the door open and stepped. Inside, in the reception area, an older police officer was sitting at a desk, holding a cup of coffee. When he saw Lucy, he immediately stood up, his face filled with concern. "Young lady, what are you doing here at this hour? Are you okay?" he asked, his voice warm. Lucy trembled as tears began streaming down her face. I need help, she said, her voice breaking. The officer stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. It's all right, don't worry. Take your time and tell me what happened. Lucy began to speak, her voice trembling and breaking. At times as tears streamed down her face. My stepmother. She makes me work so much, from morning until night. I'm so tired, and she always yells at me. The officer listened intently, his expression growing serious. He turned to a younger colleague, Officer Javier, and asked him to bring a blanket. Javier, bring a blanket. This girl needs to warm up, he said. Javier quickly returned with a thick blanket and gently wrapped it around Lucy. Are you cold? Do you need water? Javier asked, his voice kind. Lucy shook her head but felt a small comfort from their concern. When Lucy finished her story, the older officer turned to Javier. We need to contact her father immediately, but first, let's give her some time to rest. Lucy sat down on a chair, her small hands clutching the blanket tightly. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She looked around the room, the warm light from the lamps making her feel as though she had stepped into a different world. There were no shouts, no heavy chores here. People treated her with kindness and care. A female officer named Maria entered, carrying a cup of warm water. Here, drink this. It'll make you feel better, she said with a smile. Lucy took the cup, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you so much, she said, her voice trembling. It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe here, Maria replied, gently patting Lucy on the head. That night, Lucy was given a couch in the station's office to sleep on. Although it wasn't soft, it was far warmer than her cold bed at home. She closed her eyes, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her heart. The next day, Lucy knew everything would change, but for now, she finally had a peaceful night's sleep. The morning sunlight streamed through the small window of the police station, making the room feel warmer. Lucy slowly opened her eyes, feeling as if she had awakened from a strange dream. She looked around and realized she was no longer in the cold house filled with Ellen's shouting. She was still wrapped in a thick blanket Javier had given her the night before. You're awake, a warm voice called out. It was Javier holding a small tray of food. I brought you some bread and milk. Eat up, you need to regain your strength. Lucy sat up and looked at Javier with grateful eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaky. Javier smiled. Don't worry, you're safe now. We'll do everything we can to help you. While Lucy ate, the older officer from the previous night, Roberto, entered the room. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder and asked, How are you feeling? Are you ready to talk to us? Lucy nodded, setting down her cup of milk. I don't want to go back to that house. My stepmother is terrible. Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue recounting everything she had endured there. Heavy chores, the meager meals, and the punishments when Ellen wasn't satisfied. Roberto and Javier listened closely, their expressions growing more serious with every word. By the time Lucy finished, tears were streaming down her small face. We won't let this continue, Roberto said firmly. Javier, call her father immediately. He needs to know about this. Charles, Lucy's father, received the call while he was at work. After hearing the story from Javier, he left his office immediately and rushed to the police station. When Charles arrived and saw Lucy sitting there, looking frail and with bruises that hadn't fully healed, he felt his heart shatter. Lucy, Charles called out, running to embrace his daughter. "Daddy," Lucy sobbed, burying herself in his arms. Feeling safe for the first time in months, Charles turned to Roberto, his voice filled with anger and pain. "How could this happen? I thought Ellen was taking care of her." Roberto's expression was serious. "We've heard from Lucy about what she's been through. You need to know this isn't just a family issue. It's a legal matter. Child exploitation is unacceptable." Charles clenched his fists, his face full of regret. "I was wrong to leave her alone with Ellen. I trusted her too much. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my daughter." Javier nodded. "First, we'll detain Ellen for an investigation. You can take Lucy home temporarily, but we recommend finding a safer place for her in the meantime." Charles bowed his head in gratitude. He turned to Lucy, holding her small hand tightly. "I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." That afternoon, the police went to Charles's house to arrest Ellen. When the door opened, Ellen saw Roberto and Javier standing in front of her with stern expressions. "Mrs. Ellen, we have a warrant for your arrest for child exploitation," Roberto declared coldly. Ellen scoffed. "What are you talking about? I've done nothing wrong. Lucy is a spoiled child, and I was just disciplining her." Javier stepped forward, his tone firm. "We've heard Lucy's testimony, and we have evidence. You'll have to explain everything." In court, Ellen tried to resist, but she was eventually handcuffed and escorted out. She turned to Charles and Lucy, her eyes filled with anger. "Charles, you're letting her lie about me. I've been there for you since your wife died. I took care of her." Charles didn't respond, standing still with an expression of deep anger. As Ellen was taken to the police car, he turned to Lucy. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. From now on, I'll be here for you." That evening, Charles brought Lucy to the home of his close friend, Martha, a kind-hearted woman who had been friends with Lucy's mother. When Martha saw Lucy, she couldn't hold back her emotions. "Lucy, you've been through so much," Martha said, pulling Lucy into a warm hug. Lucy didn't say anything, only nodded, feeling the warmth of the woman's embrace. "Martha, I need you to look after her for a few days," Charles said. "I need to settle things and make sure everything is stable before bringing her home." "Don't worry. Lucy will be safe here," Martha replied, her eyes full of determination. As Charles left, Lucy was shown to a small but cozy room. Martha brought her a hot meal, something Lucy hadn't had in a long time. "Eat, dear. From now on, you won't go hungry anymore," Martha said, smiling gently. Lucy felt her heart warm as she began eating, tears streaming down her face out of happiness. For the first time in months, Lucy felt truly loved. The next morning, Lucy woke up on Martha's soft bed. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, brightening the small but cozy room. For the first time in months, Lucy felt safe and free from Ellen's shouting. Martha entered, carrying a breakfast tray. "You're awake, that's good. Here, have some bread and warm milk. You need to regain your strength." Lucy sat up and gave a faint smile. "Thank you, Martha. I've never had such a nice breakfast before." Martha gently stroked Lucy's hair. "From now on, you don't need to be afraid anymore. Here, you'll be loved and protected." One day, the doorbell rang. Martha went to answer it and returned with Charles. He sat down beside his daughter, his eyes full of regret. "Lucy, I need to talk to you," Charles began, his voice heavy with sadness. "I'm truly sorry for all the suffering you've endured. I didn't know Ellen was so terrible. I trusted her too much. Lucy looked at her father, her eyes welling up with tears. Dad, are you sure I won't have to go back to her? I'm so scared. Charles took her hands in his gaze firm. I promise Ellen will be held accountable by the law. I will never let you suffer like that again. At the police station, Ellen was being held and faced interrogation. Roberto and Javier sat across from her, their expressions stern. Mrs. Ellen, Roberto began coldly, we have received testimony from Lucy and other witnesses. You cannot deny your actions of exploitation. Ellen leaned back, crossing her arms. I don't know what you're talking about. That girl is just making up stories to cause trouble. She's a selfish and lazy child. Javier raised an eyebrow and placed a folder on the table. These are photos we've collected. The bruises on Lucy's body and testimonies from neighbors, like Mrs. Rose, clearly show you've been exploiting her for a long time. Ellen's expression faltered, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. I was just disciplining her. Children need discipline to grow up properly, don't they? Roberto stared directly into Ellen's eyes, his voice firm. Discipline does not mean abuse. You will be held accountable in court. Ellen said nothing further, but her face revealed her growing anxiety. Back at Martha's house, Charles began planning to change Lucy's life completely. He submitted a request to transfer jobs so he wouldn't have to travel frequently, and he also started looking for a new home. Far from the painful memories Ellen had left behind, that afternoon, Martha took Lucy out for a walk. It was the first time in a long while that Lucy could breathe fresh air without feeling afraid. She held Martha's hand, her eyes full of curiosity as she watched other children playing in the park. Do you want to play? Martha asked with a gentle smile. Lucy shook her head and stepped back slightly. I don't know anyone, and I don't know how to play. Martha knelt down and placed her hands on Lucy's shoulders. Don't be afraid, you'll get used to it soon. You're a strong girl, and people will love you. Lucy looked at Martha, warmth filling her heart. She didn't say anything, but held tightly to the kind woman's hand. A few days later, a trial took place. Charles brought Lucy to the courthouse, where she would testify before the judge. As they entered the courtroom, Lucy's heart pounded. She clutched her father's hand, feeling as though she wanted to retreat. You don't have to be afraid, Lucy, Charles said reassuringly. Just tell the truth. I'm here with you. Lucy nodded and took a deep breath. When called to the stand, she recounted everything, the heavy chores Ellen made her do, the meager meals, and the punishments she endured. The courtroom fell silent as Lucy finished her testimony. The judge turned to Ellen, his gaze cold. Your actions are unacceptable. You are guilty of child exploitation and will face appropriate punishment. Ellen stood motionless, unable to offer any defense as she was escorted away by the police. She turned to Charles and Lucy, her eyes filled with anger. But neither of them returned her gaze. That evening, back at Martha's house, Lucy sat beside Charles, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in her life. She no longer had to worry about being mistreated or abused. Charles knelt in front of Lucy, his eyes full of sincerity. Lucy, I made a huge mistake by leaving you alone with Ellen. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me most, but from now on, I promise to do everything to make it up to you. Lucy looked at her father, tears streaming down her face. I just want you to be with me, Dad. I don't need anything else. Charles hugged Lucy tightly, feeling as though he had regained a precious part of his life. From across the room, Martha watched the father and daughter smile. Finally, she's getting the love she deserves, Martha thought to herself. Following the trial, Ellen was sentenced to prison for child exploitation. The decision brought relief not only to Lucy but also to Charles, who finally realized his mistakes. He knew this was a chance to start over and build a better life for his daughter. A week later, Charles moved Lucy into their new home. It was a small but cozy house located near a school and a park. Charles wanted his daughter to live in a safe environment where she could regain her innocence and joy. "Lucy, what do you think of our new home?" Charles asked, his eyes hopeful for her reaction. Lucy looked around the house, her eyes lighting up. "I love it, Dad. It's so much better than the old place." Charles smiled, crouching down to hold her hand. "I want you to be happy here. I promise no one will ever hurt you again." On her first day at the new house, Charles took Lucy to the nearby school to enroll her. The school was colorful and vibrant, with large playgrounds and cheerful children. A teacher named Sophia, a young woman with a warm smile, knelt down to greet Lucy. "Hello, Lucy. I'm so happy to meet you. This is your new class, and I'm sure you'll make friends quickly." Lucy looked at Sophia and gave a small smile. "I'll try my best." As Charles left, Lucy felt a little nervous, but the friendliness of her teacher and classmates soon made her feel at ease. During recess, a girl named Clara approached Lucy and extended her hand. "Hi, I'm Clara. Are you new here?" "Yes, I'm Lucy," she replied shyly, taking Clara's hand. "Great. From now on, I'll be your friend," Clara said brightly, pulling Lucy toward the playground. For the first time in months, Lucy laughed wholeheartedly. She felt as though a new door had opened before her. That afternoon, when Lucy returned home, she excitedly told her father about her day at school. Charles listened attentively, his smile never leaving his face. "I'm so proud of you, Lucy. You've been so brave." After dinner, Charles told Lucy he had prepared a special gift for her. He led her to a small room in the house that she had never entered before. "This is your room," Charles said as he opened the door. Lucy stepped inside and froze in amazement. The room was decorated with bright, cheerful colors. There was a cozy bed, a small desk, and a bookshelf filled with books. Lucy gasped as she looked around. On the wall hung a large painting of a starry sky. "I know you've always dreamed of having your own space. From now on, this will be your sanctuary," Charles said warmly. Lucy looked around the room, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you, Dad. I don't even know what to say." Charles hugged his daughter. "I just want you to be happy. You deserve it." In the weeks that followed, Lucy's life grew brighter. She made many new friends at school, and her bond with Clara became stronger. Lucy also joined a flamenco dance class, something she had always dreamed of doing. That evening, Charles took Lucy to her first dance class. Seeing the other girls in beautiful flamenco dresses, Lucy couldn't help but feel nervous. "Dad, I don't know if I can do it," Lucy whispered, her eyes full of worry. Charles knelt down and held her hand. "You can do it. I believe in you, and no matter what, I'm always proud of you." Charles's words gave Lucy the courage she needed. She walked into the studio, where the other girls were getting ready. The dance instructor, Mrs. Isabel, saw Lucy and smiled. "Hello, Lucy. Welcome to my class. Don't worry, you'll fit in quickly," she said gently. Lucy nodded, feeling a small flame of confidence ignite within her. Lucy's first performance took place a few months later. Dressed in a vibrant red flamenco dress, she stepped onto the stage with a confidence she had never felt before. Charles sat in the audience, his eyes shining with pride as he watched his daughter. Martha was also there, clapping enthusiastically. When Lucy finished her dance, the room erupted in applause. She bowed, her face lighting up with a radiant smile. For the first time, Lucy felt truly free and happy. After the performance, Charles hugged Lucy tightly, his voice choked with emotion. "I can't believe my little girl has grown so strong and confident. You're the greatest pride of my life, Dad. I just want to thank you for always being there for me," Lucy replied, her eyes sparkling with tears. Martha stood nearby, smiling. "Lucy, you've overcome so much. I'm sure your mother in heaven is incredibly proud of you." Lucy looked up at the starry sky, feeling a sense of peace. She knew that from now on, her life would be a new journey filled with hope and joy. Lucy's story teaches us that courage and love can overcome any adversity. Despite being exploited and oppressed, Lucy found the strength to save herself and start anew. It serves as a reminder that children need protection and love, and that any act of exploitation is intolerable. Charles's redemption demonstrates that recognizing mistakes and taking timely action can open the door to second chances. Most importantly, Lucy's journey inspires hope and proves that it is possible to rebuild and thrive after hardship. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.